Are y'all ready to get this started?
Let's go.
3, 2, 1.
Let's get it. Here we go.
Sit your ass down and get ready for the next episode of the Urban Green Room.
The Urban Green Room.
With your host, my girl AA and that dude D. Lewis.
Hey everyone, it's your girl AA.
That's your man D. Lewis.
And welcome back to another episode of the Urban Green Room podcast. Today, we are talking about or discussing a very serious matter. So not so much fun today, but timely discussion. And this is probably going to be one of the hardest discussions that we have to have because I shy away from this because I get so emotionally charged every time this topic comes up. Every time I turn on the news, every time I see something on social media, it's just one of those topics that you either are enraged about, you are saddened, or even confused. And with today's guest, I'm hoping that we'll shed some light on the subject, can talk about it and be comfortable with voicing all of those emotions that we have and just coming to some understanding on some things maybe we should be doing right now, to be more active and engaged so that we know how to protect ourselves, and how to speak up about injustice. So before I introduce today's guest, I do have something that I want to read. We're probably all aware of these statistics, but every time I hear them, like I cringe and, it does not settle good with me. In the U.S., African Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police officers than their white counterparts. For African American women, the rate is 1.4 times more likely that they'll be killed. U.S. police officers who kill unarmed Black men often avoid criminal liability. And it's not just men, it's all African American individuals. No liability. I don't even know where to begin with this discussion.
So today we have Marques Banks joining us. Marques Banks is a civil rights lawyer. And we'll definitely leave all of his contact information on our website. But Marques is joining us in this discussion to hopefully shed some light on our legal rights and maybe how we should start to move and start thinking about where we're living and what time we're living in and how we can focus on maybe trying to change that for the betterment of our own people. So welcome, Marques. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to kind of start the discussion out with a question and we'll see where it goes from there. Legally, I think a lot of people are wondering what is the problem with this system where we cannot get justice when we have our people being shot down, and especially when they're unarmed. We have cases where warrants are served and they bust down our homes and they shoot and kill us. And in a recent case, they had the wrong home.
Taylor.
And the homeowner began to shoot and, they kill her. And then some other information has come out about this one particular police officer in that case. But, just overall, like, what is the problem in 2020? I mean, we are in 2020 and it seems like it's so far from, when we were enslaved in this country, but it doesn't seem like things have gotten a whole lot better. So explain legally why these cases are so hard to prosecute and why there are very little conviction rates when it comes to these police officers, beating and killing us.
So, I mean, one of the things that sound like a compound question that I'm addressing multiple stages. Cause one of the first things you said that stuck out to me was, how do we come so far and we still in it? Like, how does this still happen? And that's aside from like, why isn't anyone convicted? And so I think one of the big things is that we've never dealt with America's greatest sin. We never dealt with slavery. We never dealt with racism. We never got over implicit and, implicit bias and racism in a whole. And it's something that we don't want to deal with. Once we start talking about those conversations, family shut down, government, they don't want to address it as well. You start talking about something as simple as reparations and just creates this whole debate. And I think we are in somewhat historical times, but still have a long way to go, because we had one of the congressional hearing on just the setup of how to establish reparations. We didn't even get to a dollar amount, but that caused so much controversy. But let's talk about reparations. And then everyone was like, well, no, reparations. And when you address that, it's to make one whole. So it's so many different ways to make harm. So it could be bigger than just money. I'm not saying, you're still going to cut the check. Still going to cut the check, but it's bigger than just that. There's so many other things that you can do right now to make us whole. And we've never dealt with that as a country. And and it's my belief that they don't really want to overall. And so when you look at the laws aren't set up in our favor. There's so many laws to actually protect the police. One of the things that, my job, like you said, I'm a civil rights attorney. My job is really police misconduct and criminal justice reform is my main area of focus. And those cases are so hard to bring because the way that the law is established, that there's so much doubt or difference given to the officer of how they feel during that situation. If they reasonably believe, not if we go back and watch the video and say, well, come on now, man, I wouldn't have felt afraid to do that, or I wouldn't have been afraid in that situation. But if they can go ahead and make an argument that they were reasonably afraid in that situation, or thought that they were going to be harmed or deadly harm was going to be done, then they have a wider range of justification to use deadly force. And it's just sickening. And then when you go back, with a lot of cases where people hear about, because I think with so much, the media, the internet is a great and horrible thing at the same time, because there's so much information out there, but we got to make sure we learn how to vet that information or understand that information. So there's a lot of attorneys, people will, Benjamin Crump, one of the attorneys that comes up, but people get confused, the Trayvon Martin case was lost. Well, the one who would actually go ahead and put that case in motion is sort of like the prosecutor, which wasn't Benjamin Crump. So these civil rights attorneys, where there might be some victories, are actually on the civil side, not on the criminal side. So we got to understand our legal system. So there's two ways of going about getting justice. And justice is such a hard term for me to think about in this concept, dealing with police misconduct, because it comes up with, on one side, people want to see a prosecution. And that's for the general, for Black people all around. We want to see this person go to jail. It's what a lot of people might be saying. I'm going to go ahead and put it out there, though. I'm an abolitionist, but we'll get into that maybe get into that to a little different a little bit later on. But the other aspect of it is what about the families, individualizing that harm, not just the harm that we feel the fear of knowing that we being gunned down, but the families. And during my work, I worked with a lot of the families of some of the more, and I hate to say it this way, because I don't mean it in every name is important, but some of the more famous hashtags. And I say that in a way that sounds so horrible when I say it, but there's so many for every Trayon, and for every Tamir Rice and Tanisha Anderson and Rakia Boyd, Ayanna Jones, there's so many more stories that don't make it to the media. So when I'm saying just so many different families that I've worked with, and just, I lost a son, I lost a daughter, and thinking about how do we make that whole? And so sometimes it's civil, okay, we don't get this prosecution, which is very rare for the reasons that I said, because the laws just aren't in our favor for that. We go and think about it on the civil side of what can be done. And some things can be done around that. So for police misconduct overall, there's I'm talking about police shootings, but just how policing operates in general. There's about stop and frisk. I'm not sure if everyone heard about, stop and frisk or what that is, but police just rounding people up, patting them down while they on the street, basically for no reason at all. And it was happening to mostly just Black and brown people in New York, where there was a civil case on that to sort of bring what we call in the legal world injunctive relief, which is you can get injunctive relief for something if you can show that it's likely to happen again. So it's hard to get injunctive relief in policing cases because you got to show a pattern, or you got to show that it's happening to a lot of people and it's most likely going to happen again. So it's hard to do that for just one person. But because of the civil side of that case and getting injunctive relief, they were actually able to change the stop and frisk law in New York. So there's multiple ways you can go about getting justice, but it's just so hard because the laws are set up in ways where you have to go through so many hoops. You got to prove so many different things. Like if all the data isn't there, like that stop and frisk case was years in the making and organizing beyond just the lawyers. And that's the way it's always been. Even when we talk about civil rights just in a broad form, like a broad context, like it's always been a lot of organizing along with the lawyers. And so it's just hard for us. We always have an uphill battle in these cases.
So, Marques, in the previous conversation, you had said something that like stood out to me. You said, I said, well, how do we go about getting justice? And you said you did not believe in justice, so to speak, or the justice system, let's put it that way. And that you broke it down in such a way for me that was eye-opening, because I always lead with, we want justice. Like we have to fix the justice system. So can you talk a little bit about like your viewpoint on, the justice system and why it's not?
Yeah. So, I think the main concept is like, I think a lot of people feel the way that you want to feel, like the system is broken and I want to fix it. I want it to be better. I want to see justice, but the system, in my opinion, is working exactly how it's supposed to be working. And when I said it, like, policing is working the way it was designed to work. And when we look at the early conception of policing, they were slave catchers, were the first deputized officers in America. And so one of the things that I truly believe is like policing is a tool of capitalism. And in order for capitalism to, the way it works in the United States, with it being sort of a hyper-capitalist society, like we praise billionaires and millionaires so much, like, but we don't really think about like, how did they get there? In order for you to go to do that, like look at Walmart, the Walmart family, they're like millions, billionaires and whatnot, but they have employees that are only making like $7 an hour, where they could go ahead and actually do what's right by those people and actually pay them a living wage. You have people that working at Walmart who have to go on unemployment, get not on food stamps and whatnot, and can't afford healthcare in a meaningful way. But you have the owner of that company as a billionaire, and so policing was just one of those things to kind of keep that system going. And that's why we see more, like most of the crimes that are written out are more property crimes than anything, is what you sort of see. And so, and then you see like the way that it's enforced, or the way that policing operates, is to uphold that. And so as long as the system and the laws are in place the way that they are, I don't think it's necessarily broken. I think it's working the way it is. And justice for us is going to be very, very hard to get for what most people define. And the word justice, I think if you go and ask between the three of us right here, I think we would all have a different answer of what justice means. And so one of the things that, like sort of how I got involved in the law and like my drive to go to law school, was sort of rethinking that word justice and sort of breaking it down on a macro and micro level.
Okay. So I want to touch on something you mentioned there. You were saying it's designed, the system right now is designed and working exactly the way it was intended to. And you kind of touched on the inception of policing. It had its roots in slavery, which is what I've also read. So to kind of maybe break that down a little bit more for those listening and watching, so what you're saying is that the economy at that time was slavery for this country, was the biggest money maker. Mm-hmm. So to keep that going, they hired folks to capture us. capture black folks so that they could not escape and that they would continue to work and produce in whatever market that farm or, you know what I'm saying, was in. So is that kind of the inception of the capitalistic system we see today?
So I think capitalism has sort of evolved past that. I mean, well, not evolved past that in a sense, but yes, but the way it's sort of looked at in policing when we look at like broken windows theory and whatnot. So like the smallest crime against mostly we see like around shop owners, around protecting property interests. Like we'll care more about a gas station burning than the bodies that have been dropped dead on the street. So you'll see these protests go on and they care more about the CVS that's on fire than the fact that all of these black bodies have been killed by policing over time. And so, and that's what they seem to focus on. So you'll have protests, you'll have, and you know, riots come up, but as soon as you go near the downtown area, that's when the riot gear comes out and whatnot, because that's what they're more entwined to protect. And then to think about, hey, maybe we need to relook at the system. Why do we have so many black bodies in jail? Why is mass incarceration going on? Why are black women the largest rising population in prison? Instead of sort of fixing this system and actually taking a true look at what public safety is. And I think like that is a conversation that's confused on people, because when we think of public safety, you think of a tool of public safety versus like, you know, the one way people look at public safety and what most people know is just policing. But studies have shown that actually investing in housing, education, economics, and all these other things within our communities, actually investing in black communities will actually decrease crime more than any police will do. And let's be honest, like policing aren't stopping crime. They come after the fact.
Right.
So, I mean, and even that, they still ain't even solving crime in our communities. True. So it's like, what are you here to do?
Right.
It like I said, it's a system to keep us in check. And to, you know, if I keep on going on a little soapbox or whatnot, sort of talking about how the system is broken and it's working exactly the way it's supposed to. The other thing that's scary about it is how elastic the system is. We put dents in it, but it always seems to bounce back. And so like after slavery ended, we saw the black codes or the black laws come out, which led into Jim Crow and which keeping people segregated. Then once Jim Crow ended, we saw mass incarceration start to pick up to sort of, okay, we're going to keep black people and brown people in check through this. And then we saw the drug laws go into place and sort of the disproportionate ways of that. And then all stemming from the 13th Amendment, which gives, you know, the country the right to enslave people in jail. And so it's just like once one system was gone, so we got rid of Jim Crow, then this mass incarceration system comes. Once we get rid of a system, a new one is put in place that has basically the same effect of keeping us oppressed. And so that's why I was like, it's working like it's supposed to, and it's not meant to change in a fast way. And that's also because of the way sort of the Constitution was set in place. It's meant for change to happen, but slow change, but that was never also meant for us.
Yes.
That is true.
Wow. So Marques, one of the things that really bothers me, anytime there's a killing of someone who looks like us, is the fact that we sort of get judged in the media. Like it drives me crazy that the young man that was recently shot down in Georgia, that he is now, you know, they dug back in his past to find something to justify exactly why his killing, you know, took place. Like, I feel like my past, like I'm not the same person I was in 1992. I mean, I hope not. What I did back then does not justify you taking my life. And when I think back to, you know, how that young man was gunned down, I have been on properties, construction sites of new homes being built and like in awe of the beauty and the workmanship of what was going on. Not once did I think it was going to end with me, you know, my life being taken from me or me being taken from my family. Like now I think twice before I do anything. Hell, I could be sitting here in my home and get killed for no reason than I was home. Mm-hmm. Many variables that happen, and they are crucifying us in the media. just to justify, you know, why we were shot. And I hate that happens, because I never see that happen to a white person. First of all, I don't really see any white people getting killed by police. So I'm going to put that out there for you.
I mean, because when you talk about white people getting killed by police, you know what has to happen? You see them coming through with knives. You see them having armed guns in camps, like 12, 15 armed white people just around this camp, and a standoff go for about 50 days. And you're like, okay. I mean, even look at that whole, I watched the Netflix series. I heard about it, but it came on Netflix, you know, because of the quarantine, that show, Waco, which was about the Waco, which was about the standoff that happened in the 90s of all those, you know, armed people, all mostly white armed people at the church, you know, his little compound, the coat. And it took 50 days for them to go in. They didn't even go in like after the standoff. The way that most of them died was because they shot tear gas in there, not because they necessarily shot them, even though tear gas still shouldn't have been used or whatnot. But a 50-day standoff for all these armed people, and bullets didn't go through. I mean, the first day they did, but bullets didn't go through at the end. After it was like, oh no, let's negotiate or whatnot. They shot tear gas in there, and that's how most of them died, because of the fire. And so, because they was trying to get them out and preserve people and preserve life. Let it have been one black person with a gun right there. Bam, done.
Yeah.
Why are they shooting to kill us? I'm sorry, Dee. Why are they shooting to kill us? Why not shoot to disarm? But first of all, we're not even armed. Like, they're not even, like, not in the leg, not in the arm, but literally shooting to kill us, and then prosecuting us in the media for crimes, or put accusations from our past. Because we don't even know. Half the time is stuff that, it was documented. So what? That doesn't mean that it actually happened. Like, we don't get that same grace that white people get.
No, not at all. I mean, one of the things that I really think about when it comes to the media, and it was Brother Malcolm's birthday yesterday, his quote on the media saying it's the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent. And because they control the mind of the masses, that's where that gets done. And so once you demoralize a group of people for so long, it becomes more digestible to accept the fact that they're killed. So when you see black people on TV, they're thugs, they're criminals, they're all of this, it's like, oh, he must have been doing something. I mean, even when we saw the video of Arbery at the house, at the construction site, you saw a lot of support fall down, because it's like, oh, well, he was in the house. And so I think a larger problem of not just demonizing us in the media, which why I think we need to control our own narratives and how we view each other, is one of the things is like, even if he was in the house, that doesn't justify capital offense. Like, I have a problem with the government just killing people. Like, Mike Brown was the reason why he was stopped by the police in the beginning was jaywalking, which caused that altercation for him to be shot with his hands up. Getting some Skittles and whatnot, like just little things. Or even like if they thought he was stealing with, I forgot the name of the individual, but he was buying a BB gun and they thought he might have been stealing it in Ohio when they shot and killed him. But like, even if a crime was to take place, how come white people can be arrested for that crime, or we deserve to be shot? So even if a crime did take place, capital punishment shouldn't happen. And the whole concept of crime, as I was talking about earlier with public safety, is something that I still even challenge that very thought. But I think as long as the media and they sort of paint us in a certain picture, it allows it to be justifiable. So when there isn't a conviction, people aren't as disappointed, and and it's keeping the status quo going. I think one of the things we have to do is sort of change our mindset of like, we need to preserve life over anything. Like, he shouldn't have been shot dead over that. He wasn't causing anyone any harm. There's no danger to anyone. Like you said, it was a construction site that was empty. Like, no harm was taking place. Yet and still, you want to use that to justify to kill us? Like, that's not right at all. Even if it was going ahead and stealing a candy bar from Walmart, and you feel like that's justifying killing someone, you have to look at yourself and like, that's the root of the problem right there, that you feel that makes it okay. And a lot of us have been conditioned to, think that way. And that's one of the things, like putting property versus humanity first. And so we got to think like, that was a human being. That was someone's son. That was someone's brother. That was so much. And we like, over some wood. Come on now.
Right. So that, like you say, we've been conditioned, and I completely agree with that. But that's happened over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
From hell, radio, when there were just radios, we were being conditioned. But especially, you go back to the early days of motion pictures and how we've been depicted in those. And everything just kind of snowballs down when media started advancing that narrative of black and brown people being dangerous. That also started to go along with that and started to spread out to everyone. And it's just been reinforced year after year, decade after decade. You can start with, like I said before, the movie, The Original Birth of a Nation, and how we were depicted as being these dangerous, scary people, especially to white women, in that movie. And, the white man being the savior of everybody and having to take down these black animals. But that's why, in my opinion, why we've been so conditioned to it, because it's been that way for a lot of decades. And unfortunately, the way our society reacts to it is, I don't see that really changing. Because as a society, I think we, as a whole, gravitate and want to see the sensational headlines. We want to read the sensational news. And I think, and the media pushes that. You go back to the 80s and the 90s, the media pushed the narrative that, all inner cities were so dangerous, and every black man you seen was selling crack. Every young black person was selling crack, and everybody that died was gang related. And we know that wasn't the case, those of us living in those neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody who's not in that neighborhood, that's the impression they got. And so that's the impression that they get of black folks, is what they see in the media. And the media is going to continue, in my opinion, to push that narrative, because they haven't changed it yet. As much as we push back, and as many examples of us that you have out there that are, positive contributors to our communities, it's not news. That's not news,
Yeah, I mean, even pushing back a little bit on that, Daryl, like a few things, like even those people that were in those communities, there's something to be addressed when, like I said, when we talk about public safety and what that means. Because when people were living in those communities and the crack epidemic and everything that was going on, there were some very real things happening. So it was also easier to go ahead and push that narrative of black people being dangerous, because then you had some people that was on that block that was dangerous for them. And they were like, well, that's some of what I see. But we also have to take that back a little bit, because like you said, one, is not everybody. Then we ain't even going to address like how the crack get in our communities. We ain't even going to go there right now. But just thinking of like all of the things of why it was appealing for like dope boys and stuff like that, or just like, because when you strip people of hope and showing that this is the only circumstances that they have, it's easier to go ahead and say like, well, this is all you ever gonna be, go ahead and do this. And keeping it on policing. And so black people have been asking for so many different resources throughout the years. Like, we asked for adequate housing because we know public housing wasn't good enough because of the conditions that were there, and they were falling apart. We didn't get better housing. Then we started asking for better education. So we like to make our schools better. Let's go ahead and, why can't my school be like the school across in the other county? We didn't get anything for education. We want access to better jobs. We never got that. Okay, well, now there's crime in our neighborhood and we want policing. So we get that though. And the policing doesn't even stop the crime. It just goes ahead and puts a lot more of us in jail. And so when we think about public safety, like studies have shown, better housing makes it more safe and more secure. If people have access to, jobs and are able to provide, because a lot of this is like people had nowhere to go. Like, I'm not saying that that's everyone, but a lot of it's like people had nowhere to go. So then we start thinking about, we didn't have access to jobs. We didn't have good schools. They never invest in our communities, but the only thing they're honest that they always invest in is policing. Mm-hmm. I'm out here in DC, and the police budget is about half of the city's budget. Like, it's about $500 million goes to policing. But, even though it's not necessarily as chocolate city as it was before, but it's still chocolate city. But like in certain neighborhoods in like Ward 7 and Ward 8 that is predominantly Black, housing, education, all these other things, the budget keeps on taking away from them instead of giving to them when that's what they desperately need to go ahead and do it. So like if you start addressing those things that really cause the conditions of crime, okay, then we can start having these conversations. But it's easier to throw police in it because it's like it kills two birds with one stone. It provides the illusion that crime is being handled. So you have like all these politicians like, oh, we were going to get you more police and we're going to put more police on your corner. But all that seems to do is harass our young brothers and sisters so much more. And then crime isn't getting solved. And so then the politicians say, well, we'll do more crime. We'll do harsher penalties. We'll just keep people longer in jail. And sometimes, a lot of times, for the dumbest of things that we're in jail for long periods of time. But then it also does that other control thing of locking people up for free labor and whatnot and so much more. So it's killing two birds with one stone, but it's never solving the solution for us. So even still, like you mentioned, like, people serving in the community, upright standing members of the community, I even push back like that. Like I may not necessarily agree with sagging your pants. Let's just go ahead and say, or that image of it and whatnot. I may not necessarily agree. I may not do it for myself, but that does not justify the right for you to go ahead and harass that boy or kill that boy just because they sagging their pants. So I'm even standing up for Pookie. Like Pookie deserve all the rights too. It ain't just, it ain't just Thurgood Marshall who needs the rights, but Pookie need to go ahead, like don't harass Pookie either.
Right.
And so that's, I think we just need to sort of address how we look at crime. And even myself, before I sort of got into this and the way my outlook sort of changed, like I always knew I wanted to go to law school because of Malcolm X, like just looking at it from a human rights perspective and his outlook. But I always looked at Malcolm and then I'm like, dang, what if, and sort of ignore Detroit Red. So I was always looking at Malcolm and then thinking about that. And then like, it didn't get to the point where I was in law school, and I'm not gonna lie, I almost dropped out their first year because everything about it in law, once you read it, one, is not geared to us. When you look at property law and then criminal law and you start reading it and it's so depressing, it's like, dang, this situation's even more messed up than we thought. Because we always seem to think like, oh, well, yeah, I'm gonna get a lawyer. I'm like, well, for that issue, you don't realize how many hurdles you got to jump to win that case. And so my first year of law school, I went down to Ferguson after Mike Brown was killed. And so that was the first time really being touched and learning about organizing and policing and shifting the narrative of what that means. Because, some people might have felt like, oh, well, Mike Brown might have been the one sagging his pants, crossing the street or whatever, hanging out on the corner, maybe not necessarily doing much, but that's that image that he might have had. They use that to say, oh, that's why he deserved to die. And I'm over down there fighting like, no, he didn't deserve to die. And so that means I got to stick up for that image too, because you have to treat all of us better.
Right. So, Marques.
Absolutely.
What can we do? How can we become active? What is the next step? Because the way I see it with D, you, your brothers, your wife, when we leave the house, I fear and I pray. So even when you mentioned going down to Ferguson, I remember having that conversation with you. And it wasn't because I was just like, I don't want you to be involved in that. I was excited that you were taking up arms and you were going to go protest and you were going to have your voice be heard. My heart was heavy because I wanted to make sure you came home. Mm-hmm. And every day, knowing that you guys leave the house, I want you to come home. So I don't want to say, because it's unrealistic for me to view this, that you're never going to encounter a police officer, that police officer is going to be a good police officer. He's going to be a kind person and not look at my skin as a weapon. Because I don't believe that happens anymore.
I don't believe there's such thing as a good cop.
And I don't believe, neither do I. And that's probably the issue, is because right now they're all in the same boat for me. Is to do harm to someone who looks like me. So what do we do? What do I do? Is there anything that I can become active in? Like, what should I do? Because sitting here hoping that this doesn't happen again does not lead to anything but someone else getting killed. And that's evident every time I turn on the news. There's a post on social media. If they're not killed, they're being harassed and detained for no reason whatsoever. If I see another little girl get slammed on the ground by a police officer, another little boy get, punched by a police officer, all of these injustices, at some point, that police officer is going to kill. Like, what do I do to help? Like, what can I do? What can our listeners do to kind of like move some things forward? So like enough is enough, because I don't want anyone else to become another hashtag. I don't want D to be a hashtag. I don't want to be a hashtag, nor should anyone else's family have to endure that kind of pain.
No, I mean, that's all so real. I mean, whew. One of the things, I mean, there's so much you can do. And I'll put it back and telling like my own personal story in a sense. After I went down to Ferguson, it really opened up my eyes to how much organizing took place to change the system and the laws. And part of organizing is like seeing a world that doesn't exist yet, but working on creating it. And that's what all of these other organizations did. I mean, from the Nation of Islam to even when Malcolm X split off and started his own group to, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, all of them, like UNIA, which was Marques Garvey group, like so many different places that were organizing the Black Panther Party, they all envisioned a world that didn't yet exist and were working to change that. So after Ferguson and sort of like rethinking sort of my principles and how I viewed the world, I came back a little naive because I was sort of new to this and being waking up in the sense. And I was like, well, dang, how come I wasn't introduced to this when I was back home in Detroit? Like, where's all the people working on these issues there? Go ahead, make a few phone calls. Oh, wait, they've been working on that issue, but they might be small. So they may not be as large as like Black Lives Matter. So I guarantee you, most likely in your community, there's someone organizing already on these issues, working on it. And so plug into what the local issues going on in your community is number one, and figuring out what's going on, because a lot of these people look towards the president or the federal government to kind of intervene and sort of make these like to fix this issue. And I believe that the federal government sets the tone of how the local government sort of acts in a way. So while Trump may not have a hand in how policing in Detroit works, but his stance and his take on things sort of embolden them to do certain things. But you should go ahead and take place of what's going on in your local government. That's, I think, more important than the federal government, because the police commissioner comes from the mayor or for whoever's running your city or whoever's running that county, if it's the sheriffs or over the county. So the person who's appointed to that is normally done by the executive branch of your local government. Some of these issues, a lot of stuff, most of the policing and the laws in that are like local laws. As far as statewide. And so you got to go ahead and get familiar with your own jurisdiction. I think there's ways you can come together nationally, but all organizing and effort should be taking place on a local level. So get to know your mayor, get to know your city council. Here in DC, there's a lot of work being done at the city council to put a lot of checks and balances on policing for accountability, because we have a somewhat favorable city council towards that. And there's the ones who's making the laws there. So you need to go ahead and know who they are. Know who your prosecutor is. Like, I don't agree that prosecutor, like I couldn't be a prosecutor because I still think there's a lot of limits in that. But you've seen some, like, I believe there's harm mitigation. So the law as a lawyer is harm mitigation. So the things that I do, it can only go so far without organizing. And so even the prosecutors, like having a prosecutor that's more favorable CUA, you have out in Chicago, Kim Worthy, that was going on and sort of being a little bit more progressive and other things. Get involved in those elections, because a lot of those are elected. In some places, judges are elected. Michigan being one of them, judges are elected. So you need to go ahead and get involved with that. I think when you think about organizing in these different ways, like you got to realize sort of what is the end result. And so even though I do believe voting is very important, but I sometimes get frustrated when people say that, like, oh, the ancestors died just for us to vote, when it was like, no, the reason why they were fighting for the right to vote was to be full members in this democracy of what's taking place. And that takes with so much more. Because like one of the arguments about getting the right to vote was also being if you couldn't vote, you couldn't be on a jury. And so that was one of the frame points of like King was like, okay, well, we need to get on these juries. So once we're on these juries, we can go ahead and change laws. So that was a factor to vote. It wasn't just to cast a ballot. It was more about political power, and it's a tool. So it's so much bigger than that. And I think actually, honestly, voting is actually one of the easiest and one of the lowest things for you to do. There's so much more you can go ahead and do, because aside from just voting, you got to hold these people accountable. So you go ahead and build up your candidates. There's nothing wrong with that. So you go ahead. It doesn't have to be the name that you've always known. If they ain't doing what's right, you build up these candidates in the community. You go ahead and help them. You organize to get them elected. There's a few candidates that were on a grassroots movement. Alexandria Cortez in Congress right now, AOC. She was like a grassroots movement that came up. But if they ain't doing right, don't be afraid to go ahead and cut them off. Like, okay, it's time for you to get out of office. We gave you your shot. You wasn't doing right. It's time for you to go. I think those are all different ways to push the envelope, and to also just like political education in a whole. And there's so many different groups doing that you can plug into. And I'll definitely send you the link to some of these places, just like reading this and sort of rethinking the way we look at our society. Because as mentioned before, like things we just take as normal, like, and that maybe that's not the way we should be looking at it. Like I said, people like real quick, oh, if he was, shoplifting, okay, that gives him the right to be killed. We need to sort of push back on that narrative and reopen up our minds to create a new world. We're like, hey, people shouldn't be going to jail for long periods of time for this. Like I said before, I'm actually an abolitionist, where I believe that we can live in a world without policing if the right resources are invested into the communities and the people that really address what causes crime. So like mental health is a thing that's not invested in, that also has to lead with crime. Like I mentioned before, housing, education, economics, so many things that we don't invest in as a country overall, that have larger contributing factors to crime, and we're not talking about those things. We're not focusing on those things. So one of the biggest campaigns that I think, if people don't want to get like radically involved, is something that I call invest, divest. So talking about policing, we need to look at our budgets, that we look in our systems, so that we invest in the resources that our communities truly need, and divest in the ones that we really feel we don't.
Good point.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's a lot of different avenues for us to get involved in, regardless of what community we're in. Regardless of where we are, we do have some tools and resources that we can jump on board with, to be able to get involved and be more active, with this movement. And just, and it's, even if you don't want to be affiliated with a particular movement, it's still all for the betterment of our community as a whole, as Black and brown people in this country. Because it's ridiculous, how, like we've been talking about, we'll get gunned down when we're unarmed, and in a lot of cases we're on the ground subdued already, or we've got our hands up and we're in a submissive position. Yet, you have individuals who will commit mass shootings, and mass murders. You got all these white men, going into public places, shooting up the damn place, and they're walking out in handcuffs.
Not just that they walking out of handcuffs, they walking out when people still advocate for them the right to have them same guns.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hey.
So, I mean, it's just unfathomable that a Black person would be able to do that same thing and have that same treatment when, we can get pulled over for a tail light and our lives be taken from us. And it sounds crazy when you say it out loud, and it sounds unfathomable, but that's exactly what happens to us. That is not an exaggeration. They can find the littlest thing to have an encounter with us, and they can go back to laws that are still on the books, but aren't enforced, that most of the public don't even know about. You know, and oh, well, I'm pulling you over for this. And before you know it, something can escalate into a deal where, you know, we're being shot and killed. It's just crazy.
Yeah. I mean, in Black and brown communities, especially Black communities, they're incentivized to interact with us in sort of negative ways that are predatory. I mean, look at when you look at like Ferguson or even the way bail is right now, like, they're incentivized to go ahead and poor black communities and to give mass amount of tickets that we can't afford, then it still keeps us in the system. So we can't afford to pay that ticket, put us on probation over that. And you got your probation fees. If that violates, then you go ahead and under longer supervision or thrown in jail. Then they get free labor out of you. And then it's like, well, if you really had a budget or a revenue concern, go ahead and get the rich people then. But they don't, that's not what they're trained to do. And, you know, to your other point, like you were saying, like, if you don't like the movement, it's for the better good. I'll even kind of, you know, sort of suggest, like, there's so many movements going on, or so many different principles of organizing. You know, one of the things, we could have a whole history chat on this, is like, organizing and movements were never pretty. Like, you got to go back and look. There were so many different groups going on, and even though they might have disagreed and may not have always been on the same page, I think one of the things to take away from it is that we should be able to learn from the past, because, like you said, this is still nothing new. So we should learn from their successes and their failures, for one, to go ahead and moving forward, and to also remember that we still don't have the answer. So it's hard to say who was right or who was wrong. You know, everybody wants to put, you know, either Garvey versus Du Bois or Malcolm versus Martin. And it's just like, when you go back and look back at them principles, they don't even have a clear understanding of who Malcolm was or who Martin was. Like, Martin was a lot more radical than what people like to admit. Just because, you know, he was nonviolent, there were so many things. Like, he was pushing it in the military, in capitalism, like, in imperialism, like, so much more. It was like, that they don't want to talk about. But just to go on to say, like, there's so many different movements going on. I can almost guarantee you'll find one. And, you know, like you said, I don't have the answers, and I don't necessarily know if I'm right, but I know it's just, I have to do something.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the number one thing. I mean, that's the biggest thing, is just, let's do something. And something positive. And I agree with you 100%. I don't like to pit one person against another, or one organization against another, especially when you go back in history. Because they all had ultimately the same goal. You know what I mean? It was for betterment of us Black individuals, and how we're being treated in this country, and the laws that are against us, and to try to get us on equal footing so we can have the same rights and equalities as everybody else in this country. That's written into the Constitution of this country. And there was a lot of different ways of going about doing that. You know, some I agree with, some I didn't, but, you know, it's all about, like we said, do something. Let's get started. And nobody I think has the answer, but
I can tell you where to start, though.
Working together, I think we can come up with some answers and make things better. You know, piece by piece. I'm sorry, Ma, I didn't want to cut you off. What were you going to say?
No, you're fine. No, I wanted to share this story because, as a mom, and you were saying, Marques, get to know the people in your community. Well, many people watching or listening may not know that we lived in a predominantly white neighborhood. Actually, we were the first all Black family to move into this town in 26 years. That was our introduction at the grocery store, the way this one elderly gentleman had introduced himself to us. So I knew right away that my skin was a weapon. And when you have boys that you're trying to get to be men, like, and praying that they get to that age, their skin was going to be more so a weapon. So when we lived there, the first thing I did after being pulled over 4 times in a row, like, it was back to back every day, I got pulled over because we had different cars. And every time I drove a different car, I got pulled over. So I took the initiative to go to the police station because I said, I'm not doing this shit no more. You're not going to pull me over. The New Yorker in me came out. So that was not good at all. But knowing the situation and the climate, because at that point, I think early 2000s is when we started to see more of a rise, so to speak, in how they were treating us. Police officers were really starting to treat us. And as it progressed, as social media and cameras and the technology, all of that became a little bit more prevalent and useful and showing exactly what was happening to us. But coming from a big city, moving to a small town, I'm in Whiteville. I go to the police office station, introduce myself. And the very first thing that I said to them was, hello, my name is Mrs. Lewis. I am the mother of 4 boys and a husband who look like me. And I want to know, how safe are they going to be in your community? And the first gentleman laughed at me. And then he quickly straightened up because he was like, you're not kidding. I said, no, I'm not kidding. I said, because while you might live in your bubble of a community, I happen to know that if you encounter one of my children, if you encounter my husband, the first thing that you're going to see is whatever image of a Black person you saw on TV. I don't want no problem. I don't need you harassing them. I am trying to do the right thing to let you know we are in the community. Like, I'm just like you. And we have more in common than we don't, But as years went on, I couldn't keep this up year after year. Every time new police officers came on the force, I couldn't keep going into the police station, to make this effort because I wanted everyone to return home to me safely. With that being said, like, I don't feel like people should have to be that drastic. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I choose to live in one part of town or one city over another for, better educational opportunities for my family because my job relocates me somewhere, just because I want to, because I have that right. If I see a beautiful home somewhere and I want to go live there, I should have the right to be able to do that. But I know that's not the case. Because the perception of what my family looks like is, if it's predominantly not, looking like me in the community, there's a good chance that somebody's going to get injured. There's going to be some harassment. So as far as reaching out, I just don't feel like that type of involvement with police I was extreme with it. I don't think that does us any good anymore. And again, this was early 2000s when this happened. And here I am right now where, I know a lot of the police officers and, they're very cordial. That still doesn't stop them from pulling me over and treating me any different when a situation happens. It doesn't. I introduce myself now, if I did a U-turn and, they didn't like the U-turn, for whatever reason. When they pulled me over, all I felt like I gave them was the power to know my name. Because I felt like they still saw me as a threat. And that was the issue. So I do not believe in the police protect and serve. I don't. I believe they're out to do harm. I feel like anytime I do encounter them, there's a fear that instantly comes over. And I don't know as a mom that I'm ever going to get over that because I know the reality is that I may not return home to my family and neither will my children.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the same way you do about police. Like, I have no trust in that institution. And, I'm not even trying to necessarily talk to them as least possible. Like you said, the only thing that you gave them was now that they know your name. And so I even try to find ways to think of situations where trying to think about, like, do we need to call the cops for this? Is there another way to go ahead and deal with this situation? Because they're not going to de-escalate. And one of the rise in cases that I'm having at my job is actually police harming or killing people over mental health checks. So people are calling the police over someone that's having a mental health issue and they're harming them. And so it's thinking of ways like, no, like, let's not call the police because they're not making the situation better. And so I just want to be clear about when I said about organizing and knowing your community. I think there's two distinct roles in that. And I'm not afraid to say this. Black people need to organize on the betterment of Black people. White cousins or white allies or however you want to call them, they need to go ahead and get their cousins and go ahead and saying, you know, and working on those issues, the ones that be like, oh no, that be marching for Black Lives Matter or whatnot. Their role is to go ahead and get their cousins in check, and go ahead and organize in their communities so we don't have to go to the police station and do that. And so that's their role in this. So they have a role to play in this as well. And if they're not willing to play that role, that's when you need to know that that's that friend to be like, oh no, I'm not racist. I have one Black friend. And like, no, that ain't good enough. You got to go ahead and do more. You got to show me more and do better. Because yeah, that's what their role is. Because if we look at the Arbery situation, remember, even though he was a retired cop, I think so. Or we look at, you know, Trayvon Martin's situation, those weren't cops. Mm-hmm. So it's not just them. And the laws still aren't in our favor with that, because the stand your ground law applies a lot more favorably to whites and almost not at all to Black people.
Yep.
You look at the Black woman who was in her house trying to protect her kid when an abusive ex-lover or whatever was trying to come in, and she shot at the ground or in the air as a scare shot. And they convicted her on that, and they wouldn't have probably stand your ground. And that was in Florida. And so I think it's very important to realize, like, white people have work to do in this as well. And that's what they need to be out there doing.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's why I think that's another reason why we aren't further in the discussions that we seem that we think we should be in this country, is that the other side of the equation has not done enough to advance the conversation forward. So, you know, in the comfort of their own homes, they'll be like, oh, that was terrible and this shouldn't be happening and I don't agree with this. But just sitting in your home and not speaking out about it is complacency, which is just as bad as, you know, agreeing with it. I guess in my opinion it is, because nothing happens. You know, okay, so you sat there and you told your husband or your family or your kids that, hey, this is wrong, this is bad, this shouldn't be happening. But, you know, when you go to the grocery store and you talk to your girlfriend, Susan, you know, she tells a joke about it and you kind of give a shy laugh about it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. We all have a part that we need to play in this if we intend to make things better, quicker.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even necessarily think they talking with their families about it. Like, we over here talking, and we barely talk about it in a way that sort of addresses these. Like, we're talking about it more now, but for a long time, all it was the talk of how we're supposed to conduct ourselves to protect ourselves, but not necessarily talking about how racist or, you know, talking about racism. Because we also get that, you know, the whole pull yourself up by the bootstrap. You can't blame the man for everything. When, I mean, that whole pull you up by the bootstrap, that's never been the case, because everyone has had help to get into the position that they are. And so, like, we just wouldn't, you know, some communities within Black people's like, nah, we didn't talk about it in that way. But the other thing is, like you said, so they might talk about it they might say something to me, like, oh, that's bad. But then they won't go ahead and tell their uncle, who they know is racist, like, oh, that's bad and whatnot. You know, with this situation with Arbery, like Justin Timberlake, he posted saying, you know, oh, this is bad, but on his Instagram. But he took the comments section off of his Instagram post because he didn't want to see his fans disagreeing with him. And he also didn't want to engage in that argument, I believe. It's, you know, once you start seeing, oh, your fans real racist, you going to address that? And then if he doesn't, now we have room to stand on. So it's like, oh, you said it for that reason. And someone also addressed the Justin Timberlake situation. But it's like, especially you, bro. You made a lot of money off of us. You know, your music was, you know, you went ahead and work with Timberland and, you know, started working off of us. But you go ahead and make some statements now. Like, you put that picture up. And like I said, a lot of people when they thought it was just, like, in their mind, it was just jogging. But then when the controversy comes out, you still going to stand up for us? Like, let's see what you got to say. Put them comment section on. Let's see how many of your fans disagree with you and if you're willing to engage and talk with them.
At the end of the day, I mean, and that was a little, I guess, in his camp's opinion, might have been a little cute PR stunt.
Right.
But anybody who's engaged and who can see what's what, they can see it for what it was. It was a cheap little PR stunt. If you're going to post it and leave the comments up there, address it, talk about it, have a conversation. Mm-hmm. You're not having a conversation. You just put out a statement saying, oh man, this is bad. All right, tell us something we don't know, motherfucker. I mean, you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, that's just it. You know, we tiptoe around the topic all the time. Like, we never really address it head on, as a whole. And I think we need to get more comfortable talking about it, even with ourselves, even amongst ourselves. And being okay to disagree on some things. You know what I mean? And even the best run organizations have differences of opinions. That's okay. I mean, that furthers the conversation. Let's look at it from these 4 views. Okay, we got these 4. Okay, well, let's talk about it. Let's rationally see where we can go with all of them. You know, which ones are viable, which ones aren't. So, yeah, this is a great conversation to have, and I hope, you know, our listeners continue to have this conversation, in their own communities. I think I can speak for AA when I say this. I believe that, you know, we both want to, and I think we both are gonna, you know, try to get more involved in seeing what's around here locally where we are. Yeah, so yeah, we want to make sure that we get the listeners and the viewers your information and stuff, and so that we can all get involved more. Go ahead, Ma.
It's one of those topics that we can no longer hide from. Like, it can be emotionally charged because you should. Like, that tells us that you're showing some empathy, that you're engaged and you see the injustice. What we don't want to become is numb to what's going on around us and start making excuses and judging our brothers and sisters for being shot unjustly. We got to start the conversation, which is why we're talking about it today on the podcast. So I am so thankful because this conversation literally could go on. We could have a part 2 and part 3. And if there is a police officer that this broadcast, comes across and would like to join us, because again, we reached out to police officers to join us so we can get their point of view on this topic. And unfortunately, retired and active, turned us down, and that's okay. We're going to talk about it, and it may be a little one-sided, but now we're talking. So if anyone wants to join us, we can continue the discussion. I'd love to have Marques back, so that he can enlighten us some more from a legal standpoint, plus around his journey and his activation to become an activist and to be involved. All of this is so important. So thank you, Marques, for joining us.
Are we gonna have him back, Marques? Are you open to that? I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to do it too.
Yeah, I'm open to come back. I mean, there's so many different ways we could take this conversation.
And that's why I want to advance it a little bit more, because I think we kind of touched on maybe a couple points that I think are pieces of the overall conversation. I think there's other topics we need to discuss, and maybe we could get together after this and kind of lay out what that might look like, you know, so we have something to focus on and kind of stay to task. But I'd love to have you back, and I'm pretty sure after hearing this and watching it, our listeners would as well.
Definitely open it. Thank you for having me. there's actually a resource that was put together that has like different organizations working on different things in like most major cities and states that also give you for your listeners so they can find different ways might be able to plug in their community already, make it a little easier for them.
Thank you. And we'll put all that information on the urbangreenroom.net site so that it'll be a click away. We're going to make it real simple. If you want to get involved, now is the time. Like there's some urgency around this because it's only, we're one person next away from another hashtag. And I refuse to allow anyone else to become a hashtag. I'm so tired of what's happening to, our people. And now's the time to stand up for what's happening, speak out, let your voice be heard. But more importantly, let's start making a difference. And it starts with the conversation. So thank you, Marques, for joining us.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning into the Urban Green Room podcast. Let's keep the conversation going. Hit us up at urbangreenroom.net or on our Facebook or IG page.
I always follow them.
Tell us what you think about today's conversation. If there's a topic you want to discuss, let us know. And by all means, tell a friend. The Urban Green Room podcast, giving you something to talk about. Until next time, we out.
Hey everyone, it's your girl AA. I just wanted to talk briefly with you regarding tonight's episode of the Urban Green Room podcast. As many of you know, we tape in advance all of our episodes so we can make sure that we're putting out quality audio and video for you. With tonight's episode, we actually taped it about a week in advance, and almost a week from the recent killings of George Floyd. My heart goes out to his family. We hear your cries. I think we're all suffering right now. So this conversation, wow, we were going to push it back even further because we wanted it to be a 3-part series. Decided to move this episode up right now because of its relevancy. But more importantly, we need to start having a conversation about this. We need to create the dialogue for change. We need to know what we need to do to create that change so that we can have positive outcomes. And who do we need to address this with? Because at this point, very few people that don't look like us are not involved. So hopefully tonight's conversation and conversations like ours will be the beginning of some much needed change in this country. Much needed change in how we look at law enforcement and what their role should be versus what they're giving us now. And a change for how we view racism in this country. It can't be this difficult. And yet after 200 plus years, we're still addressing this. So we need to talk about it. We need some honest, truthful dialogue, and we need to get our emotions out. And I know tonight's episode was a very emotional conversation for me to have as a mother of Black boys or Black men, and a wife married to a Black man, and a sister to Black brothers. And, I have friends. We need to start the dialogue because at any moment, any one of us can be the next hashtag. And it's something that I do not want to happen anymore. It is something that we need to find a solution. So we wanted to start the dialogue. It's one of many that should be had again. and it's part of a 3-part series for the Urban Green Room podcast. I encourage you all to watch, to listen, to comment, and by all means, let your emotions out, because we can't keep this bottled in any longer. It's the only way that we'll start to heal and start to logically think of things that we need to do to change this narrative. So thank you again for watching. We appreciate your support, and we're in this together, all of us. Hashtag no more hashtags. Thank you.